We may have just witnessed the first shots of World War III. I know that might sound like hyperbole. I would bet against it. And remember, World War III does not mean a nuclear apocalypse necessarily. However, depending on how things pan out over the next weeks to months, it is plausible to think that historians may view this past weekend as the start. What I am referring to is Ukraine's strike along the Caspian Sea. On the surface, the long-range attack seemed to target Iranian weapons heading to Russia, but now Iran claims the strikes targeted the Islamic Republic, and even the direction of the shipment is unclear. So, today, let me walk you through the current world at war, then try to sort out the disputed facts regarding the strike, before trying to reason through what Russia was trying to get out of Iran that started this, before turning to how Ukraine may be trying to angle this to apply leverage to the United States, which ultimately leads us to what is happening in Iran right now. Hooray, world at war. But first, let me rewind. Indeed, we are undoubtedly a world at war today. What separates this tangled web from a true world war is one actor active on two fronts simultaneously, like the United States juggling the European and Pacific theaters during World War II. In contrast, the last 5 months have seen two distinct conflicts, joined together only by material support. Ukraine fights Russia with assistance from European countries, plus some light help, especially with intelligence, from the United States, even under the Trump administration. And Russia fights Ukraine with support from, among others, Iran. Meanwhile, Israel and the United States fight Iran with the help of some limited European assistance, and Ukraine aiding Arab partners in their defenses against Iranian drones. Iran receives support from Russia, once again, especially in the realm of intelligence sharing. Notably, what we have not yet had are things like Russian troops on the ground in Iran to provide active air defense, or US fighter jets patrolling the skies over Ukraine. That takes us to last weekend, when Ukrainian drones made the 1,000-plus kilometer journey to hit targets on the Caspian Sea. I will cover the disputed details of the incident in a moment. For now, I want to focus on Kyiv's framing of the strikes as it connects to this discussion of World War III. Years ago at this point, Iran gave Russia the template to produce Shahed drones, which have been raining fire on Ukrainian cities ever since then. Zelensky is now framing Iran's role in these attacks as Iran actually having attacked Ukraine. Thus, what happened over the weekend was Ukraine responding by attacking Iran. To be clear, we are still looking at cases of arms shipments. However, you can imagine how a series of tit-for-tat strikes could snowball this into something more, which would then lead to last weekend receiving the designation as the start of World War III, according to future historians. But we will all have to wait to see whether there are sustained attacks. To keep us focused on the present, let me switch over to discussing the Ukrainian strikes on Iran-related targets, among other clearly Russian targets, in the Caspian Sea. Ukraine says that it hit 2 Russian-flagged cargo ships. Iran says that Ukraine struck an Iranian ship, killing 1 Iranian sailor and injuring at least 1 more. Iran's foreign minister claims that this is part of a much larger plot with Israel tied to it, and, therefore, the strike will not go unanswered. To be clear, this is not the first time that Ukraine has struck what seems to be Iranian arms shipments to Russia in the Caspian Sea. The clearest example of this occurred back in August of last year. Iran did not raise nearly the same fuss that time, however. It is difficult to be sure what is different today, aside from perhaps the 1 Iranian fatality. As a side note, if you ever wondered why Western countries deliver Ukrainian aid to Poland and require Ukrainian trucks to cross the border to pick everything up and deliver it to Ukraine, this is why. In any case, the he said, Kyiv said continues, with Iran claiming that the target was commercial, and Ukraine declaring that it struck ships carrying military components. What is interesting here is that both depictions may simultaneously be accurate. They could be describing separate vessels, or they are telling the same story about the same ship or a pair of ships. A vessel's flag often poorly corresponds to the country that is actually behind it. Moreover, a cargo ship may have been carrying both civilian goods and military components. In what hardly feels like coincidental timing, Ukraine spent the previous week striking wild berries distribution centers inside of Russia. A small portion of the wild berries business is indeed dual use for military. The company has tried to fill a void where the Russian military under-equips its soldiers, and so ordinary Russians order equipment from wild berries, either for themselves or for friends and family deployed to Ukraine. For anyone who cares about laws of war, this is on very shaky footing. Notably, however, it is telling that we have not seen any Western leaders raising a fuss over the wild berries strikes. Well, back to the Caspian. Ukraine may have had intelligence suggesting that a civilian cargo vessel was doubling as a military deliverer, and therefore chose to preempt the damage. I doubt Europe will blink an eye here if everything from last week was fine. It is worth taking a deeper dive on what Iran may still be doing to assist Russia. According to the Ukrainian ambassador to Israel, the offending ship was carrying drone and missile components. This would not have been surprising to hear 3 years ago. Due to decades of economic sanctions, Iran became an expert on how to procure weapons components when the Western world is out to stop you. In turn, when Russia invaded Ukraine and Moscow became the target of similar restrictions, the Kremlin had to turn to Tehran for help. But closing in on 4.5 years of war, apparently Russia must still rely on Iran, even as Iran has its plate full at home. To add to the puzzle, Russia has licensed Shahed drones and produces them domestically. You would guess that Russia would therefore no longer need any further assistance. However, you may recall that at the start of the Iran war, I mentioned that Russia had to be nervous about Iran's supply chain. Weapons licensing agreements typically involve per-unit royalties, and that creates a clear, credible commitment problem. Once I know how to produce the weapon, I could just do it myself and not bother to pay you. Given that we are talking about Russia here, you could understand why Iran would be careful to work around the commitment problem. The easiest solution is to hand over blueprints for most of the weapons system, but withhold a handful of critical components. This allows Russia to expand total production, but guarantees that you retain leverage. If the royalties stop, then so too do your shipments of the critical components. It is also conceivable that Russia is just not very good at producing some parts of Shaheds, and thus still farms those portions of the production out to Iran. You may also recall us discussing arrangements along those lines recently, when the United States agreed to license Patriots to Ukraine. One thing to flag here. That same ambassador said that the ships were going from Russia to Iran. I suspect that might be an error on his part, and media reports that do not cite him tend to have the flow going in the other direction. It would be very interesting indeed if Ukraine suddenly thought it should be blowing up weapons destined for Iran. That would make Ukraine a direct offensive combatant in the Iran war. This may very well be the case, and I am sure that Trump would absolutely love this if it were true, and maybe it is a part of a quid pro quo involving the Patriots, because certainly the United States would not want to be directly involved in bombing Russian targets. But I think we should hold off until we hear specific confirmation of this from someone higher up on the food chain. That provides an excellent segue to our next topic, which is what Ukraine's larger strategy might be here. Tomorrow, Zelensky will fly to Washington for what is, on the surface, a memorial service for Senator Lindsey Graham. Interestingly, it will be exactly 1 year and 5 months after the infamous Oval Office meltdown, which has set the tone for the bilateral relationship among the general public ever since then. In practice, what is also happening is a summit among the 3 active combatants of this side of the increasingly conjoined wars. You see, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will also be there. Whether this will be a pair of bilateral meetings with Trump, or whether all 3 of them will have a group conversation, remains to be seen. Focusing just on the Trump-Zelensky relationship for a moment, the Oval Office meltdown paints an inaccurate picture of what the pair have done since then. Zelensky points to their one-on-one conversation at the Pope's funeral as a turning point. Now, it is always difficult to understand what Trump is thinking, but we should note for the record that the then National Security Advisor Mike Waltz was the one who advocated to cancel the rest of the agenda following the Oval Office meltdown. Trump was prepared to continue, trying to secure the business deal that the whole summit was intended to finalize. More recently, we had the aforementioned licensing of Patriots announced at the NATO summit earlier this month, and we are also observing a shift in the MAGA wing's overall position on Ukraine, highlighted by Laura Loomer's recent trip to the country and seemingly complete conversion to blue and yellow. While some of this may seem like a feel-good story, there is also a practical motivation at play. Ukraine has changed the momentum on the battlefield over the last 5 months, and so skeptics are increasingly seeing Ukraine as a good investment. Zelensky may be seizing the opportunity by injecting himself into the Iran campaign to show the United States how Ukraine can make a contribution beyond shooting down drones for Arab allies. And that takes us to the current U.S. situation with Iran. To grossly oversimplify things, we have had a ceasefire that never really was a ceasefire, followed by the restart of a war that never really stopped. And as of right this second, we seem to be at another pause, which is liable to go nowhere if negotiations are equally counterproductive. Even with new missiles and drones firing away recently, the vast majority of the conflict remains the dueling blockades along the Strait of Hormuz. On the U.S. side, part of what might be motivating the current truce are the Pentagon's renewed pleas to not further deplete U.S. missile stockpiles. Again, to engage in wild speculation here, Zelensky may be trying to position Ukraine as a weapons bridge for the United States. Kyiv can increase the production of its drones much faster than the United States can currently. The main barrier that stands in the way for Ukraine is money. If Zelensky were to secure future investment funds from the United States, then Ukraine could increase its production lines and pay things back to the United States in the form of long-range drone attacks, either directly launching them or by turning over the keys to the United States. For its part, Iran lacks a good way to drive a wedge into that relationship. Iran has already responded to Ukraine's attack by threatening to retaliate. Ukraine is not beholden to shipments going in and out of the Strait of Hormuz, though, and Ukraine is also likely too far away from Iran for Iran to be able to effectively retaliate via the air. That leaves increasing assistance to Russia as the remaining possibility. Now, I am sure that Iran could find something to do here, though it is hard to see how this will have a significant effect. It is another one of those cases where a state says that they will do more in response to an attack, but then that raises the question of why they weren't doing more already. The mess of the world at war continues. So, what are our takeaway lines for today? Ukraine has struck something Iran-related at minimum on the Caspian Sea. If things devolve further, it is plausible to describe what happened over the weekend as the first shots of World War III. Beyond the straightforward upshot of disrupting Russian supply chain logistics, Ukraine may be trying to bolster U.S. support of it. We will probably have to revisit this tomorrow after we know the outcome of the summit in Washington. Until then, we can't do anything about it. Meanwhile, if you have missed out on all that I have been up to on my secondary channel, there are a ton of interesting questions that I can answer on the Geopolitics Helpline. Some even say that my secondary channel is now the main channel. You can check it out by clicking here. And if you enjoyed today's video, then please like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you tomorrow. Maybe here, maybe on the other channel. Who knows? Take care.